You saw a very cheap property which sounds too good to be true, and saw a word which you didn't recognize from other adverts called Erbbau or Erbpacht. In English, it's leasehold property. Let me try and explain what this is and which consequences this has. Hi, my name is Ajay, and in this channel we'll show you how to buy a house here in Germany. The hereditary building right, also called ground lease, is a limited right in rem, which means bound to a thing. It allows you to build a property on another person's plot. Perhaps you've already heard that you can secure favorable building land with the hereditary building right under certain circumstances. In practice, however, there are a number of contractually regulated factors that you must take into account. It's worth your while to familiarize yourself with the advantages and disadvantages of ground leases in advance. Leasehold property means that you're allowed to build or acquire a building on someone else's plot without having to purchase the land yourself. The owner of the land allows you to use this land over the term of the contract, to build on it, to rent it, or to use it for any other purpose. You're allowed to sell, pass it on to your kids, etc. If you sell or encumber it, you may need the consent of the owner of the land. The notarization of the leasehold contract is mandatory. A second land register sheet is created in addition to the normal land register. In addition, a hereditary building land register is created for the corresponding property. Normally, the heritable building right contract is typically limited to maximum 99 years. As a heritable building right holder, you must pay the owner of the land the so-called ground rent during this period. This is freely negotiable when the ground lease is granted. The ground rent is calculated as a percentage of the land value. The ground rent amount is therefore made up of the land area times the land value times the ground rent rate. Here, the interest rate is usually between 3 to 5% of the land value, which is subsequently stipulated in the ground lease contract. As an example, land area is 1,810 square meters, the land value is 230 euros a square meter, and the ground rent, which you agreed upon mutually, is 4%. So the annual ground rent is 16,652, which is 1,810 times 230 times 4%. In addition, you'll usually find a value retention clause. This is to ensure that the property owner receives compensation for economic changes, general price development or inflation, due to the long duration of the contract. This means that the interest rate is regularly adjusted, which can be done at the earliest every 3 years or so, and usually every 5 years. Traditionally, it is mainly church institutions and public corporations, state owners, or even insurance companies that grant ground leases. These have large real estate holdings and usually plan for very long periods. Through this long-term land lease, the ground lease provider achieves a permanently secure income. When the agreed term of the contract expired, so maximum 99 years, the ground lease expires itself. In this case, the property legally passes on to the landowner, as it is considered an integral part of the land. In this case, however, you can expect appropriate compensation from the landowner. How much this is depends on what agreements were made in advance. For residential buildings, the compensation is usually around 2/3 of the market value. However, it is possible to extend the contract or issue a new contract. In case of a renewal, the contract stays as is and is just extended by n number of years. In the case of a new contract, the terms of the contract may be renegotiated. If you are the leaseholder, the biggest advantage is that you only have to pay ground rent. This is paid to the landowner at regular intervals, monthly or quarterly. With the payments of the ground rent, you can do almost anything you want on the property. As a leaseholder, you only have to finance the building and not the plot. Thus, you can save considerable sums of money. Unfortunately, the heritable building right has not only advantages. If you choose to buy such a property, you have to pay the ground rent to the landowner for the entire term of the contract. Since the fluctuations in the land interest rate may be added to this, not buying the land can end up being more expensive. Another disadvantage is that you are not allowed to change the plot as you like. You have to get the owner's permission in advance. In addition, it is ultimately much more difficult to sell a building on leasehold property. As the owner of the heritable building right, you often have to accept a lower sales price. Over time, the only thing increasing in value is the plot, which you do not own. And at the same time, your property, which is the building, is decreasing in value. Also, as you cannot put a land charge on the plot because you don't own it, the bank will usually only finance up to 60% of the buying price. So you would need to have around 10% closing cost as well as 40% of the property costs in hand. In Germany, most banks use the so-called Munich method to evaluate heritable building rights evaluation. Here, the evaluation is initially based on full ownership, after which a value is determined if the land has no heritable building right. Subsequently, 3 value deductions are made due to the disadvantage of the heritable building right. First discount. Due to the limited term of the ground lease, the land value is discounted down to the valuation date when the ground lease expires and deducted from the full ownership. Deduction number 2. The constructed building belongs to the leaseholder. The contract stipulates the ratio in which the value of the building is compensated after the expiry of the ground lease. Example from above, 2/3. Any portion of the building that is not to be compensated is also to be deducted from the full ownership, discounted to the valuation date. Third deduction, in the leasehold contract, further things such as preemption rights, reversionary claims, or development restriction are regulated as well. In this case, the bank appraiser must take these disadvantages into account as well. For this purpose, he usually consults data of the appraisal committee, in German the Gutachterausschuss. If you use the heritable building right, you initially save costs for the plot. However, you must bear in mind that the term of the ground lease is very long. It's also important that you have a good relationship with the owner of the land, as he must agree to all structural changes to the property. The property will definitely not be financed 100%. And you will need to bring in about 50% of the property cost as own equity. You will not see much of an appreciation of your building value over time. All in all, I personally would not buy an Erbpacht property. If you have a different opinion, let me know in the comments.